It was just another busy morning at the little restaurant tucked on the corner of a quiet street. The place always smelled of coffee and warm bread. The same faces came in every day. Workers rushing before their jobs, families on weekends, and a few regulars who loved chatting with the staff. And among all the people moving in and out, there was one person most customers barely noticed. She moved quickly from table to table, her hair tied neatly, her apron spotless even during rush hours. She smiled at everyone even when she was tired. Her voice was soft, her steps light, and she never complained. People only knew her as the polite waitress who brought their food on time and remembered their favorite orders. Nobody really stopped to think about her life beyond those four walls. When the restaurant closed at night, she often stayed a bit longer, cleaning tables, wiping the counter, or helping in the kitchen. The others would laugh, saying she worked too hard, but she didn't mind. It was quiet at night. The sound of chairs being stacked, the hum of the fridge, and the faint music from the radio made her feel calm. She had been working there for almost 2 years. It wasn't what she dreamed of doing, but it paid the rent and helped her manage her bills. She lived in a small room not far from the restaurant, barely big enough for a bed, a small desk, and one special thing: an old upright piano against the wall. It wasn't pretty anymore and some keys were chipped, but it was her favorite thing in the world. Every night after her shift, she would go home, drop her bag, and sit at that piano. She didn't care how late it was or how tired she felt. Her fingers would slowly press the keys and soft melodies would fill the tiny room. It was her escape. It was where she felt like herself again. Before life got hard, she had studied music at a small college. She was a promising student. Her teachers said she had a rare gift. Music was her first language. But when her father fell sick and hospital bills started to grow, she had to leave school and start working full-time. The dream of becoming a pianist faded into something she only allowed herself to visit in those quiet hours after work. Sometimes, when she played, she'd close her eyes and imagine herself on stage. A big grand piano in front of her. Lights shining, people listening quietly. In that dream, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't worried about rent or tired feet. She was free, surrounded by the sound of music that felt alive under her hands. But dreams are fragile things when life demands so much. Every morning she'd wake up early, tie her hair back, and walk to the restaurant before sunrise. Her co-workers liked her because she never complained. Even when the customers were rude or the tips were small, she always said thank you, even when it wasn't easy. One of her co-workers, an older cook named Peter, often watched her wiping tables long after closing. One night he said, "You really should rest, you know. You work too much." She smiled gently and said, "It's okay. I'm used to it." He laughed and shook his head. "You're young. You should be doing something fun." She didn't answer, just smiled again. Fun wasn't something she thought about much anymore. Life to her was about getting through each day and holding on to the small things that made her heart feel alive, even if it was just 10 minutes at her piano before bed. One day, a group of customers came in during the afternoon lull. They were from a nearby hotel discussing an upcoming event, a big charity gala that would take place that weekend. She overheard bits of their conversation while serving coffee. They talked about decorations, catering, and a live pianist who would perform. Her heart gave a tiny jump at that word. Pianist. She carried their plates carefully, pretending not to listen, but her mind began to wander. What would it be like to play at a place like that? To dress beautifully, to sit at a shining piano in front of a crowd, to be seen, not as a server, but as someone who creates something beautiful. When the guests left, she gathered their plates and smiled softly to herself. She didn't tell anyone what she was thinking. That night, after closing, she sat at her piano again. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to play a melody she'd written years ago, back when her father was still alive. It was gentle at first, then grew stronger, as if the music itself carried all her pain and hope at once. She didn't play from sheet music, she never needed it. The tune came from somewhere deep inside. She didn't know that her neighbor, an old woman living next door, could hear through the thin walls. That woman often paused her TV at night to listen, a soft smile on her face. She didn't know the waitress's name, but she always whispered to herself, "Whoever she is, that girl plays from her soul." At the restaurant, nobody talked about dreams. The workers spoke about bills, rent, and weekend shifts. They were good people, all trying to survive. Yet she felt different. as if she was quietly carrying something inside her that didn't fit the world she was in. Sometimes customers would ask her, "What do you do when you're not working here?" She'd just smile and say, "Not much, really." No one ever guessed that her fingers could bring a piano to life. One slow afternoon, the restaurant manager gathered everyone to announce some news. A well-known hotel nearby had hired the restaurant to cater at their charity event. They needed extra help, and the manager asked who wanted to join for the weekend shift. It would pay a little extra. Almost everyone raised their hand, including her. She thought of the piano she needed to have tuned, the rent coming soon, and said yes quietly. The manager wrote down names and gave out schedules. She didn't know it yet, but that small decision, volunteering for that one event, would change everything. Over the next few days, she worked double shifts. The event was going to be fancy. Elegant decorations, wealthy guests, famous names. The restaurant staff had to look their best. The manager handed out new uniforms and made sure everyone followed the rules carefully. On the evening of the event, she arrived early at the hotel ballroom. She had never seen a place like that before. Tall ceilings, chandeliers, and tables covered in white cloth. The room sparkled, and right there in the middle of the stage stood a glossy black grand piano. It was beautiful. She couldn't take her eyes off it. She walked slowly past it as she helped set up the tables, her heart pounding. The pianist hadn't arrived yet, but someone had left sheet music open on the stand. She wanted so badly to touch the keys just once, to feel that smooth surface under her fingers again, but she didn't dare. She kept glancing at it throughout the evening every time she passed the stage. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter filled the room, but she barely noticed. To her, that piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a reminder of everything she'd lost and still hoped for. Later that night, she stepped out to the hallway for a short break. She leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. The sound of the crowd inside faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the hotel corridor. She closed her eyes and imagined what it would feel like to walk up to that piano and play. To let the music speak for her. All the words she never said, all the dreams she'd hidden away. But then she shook her head. "Don't be silly," she whispered to herself. "You're just here to work." She went back inside, picked up a tray, and continued serving the guests. Her smile returned, her posture perfect, her movements graceful. No one noticed the small flicker of sadness in her eyes. The night went smoothly. The guests seemed happy, and the manager was proud. When it was finally over, she stayed behind to help clean up. Most of the staff had already left, chatting and laughing as they clocked out. She gathered napkins and stacked chairs quietly, the way she always did. When she walked past the piano one last time, she stopped. The lights were dim now, the room almost empty. She looked around, then no one was there. Slowly, she walked closer. Her heart beat faster. She reached out and touched one of the keys, just a soft press. The sound echoed gently in the quiet room. It was like the piano was waiting for her, like it remembered her somehow. She sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, she thought of leaving, but something inside her refused. She took a deep breath and began to play, softly, carefully, letting the notes fall into the silence. The melody that filled the ballroom wasn't loud or perfect, but it was full of feeling. It was the sound of someone who had carried music in her heart for too long, finally letting it breathe again. She didn't know that one of the event organizers had come back into the room to collect some papers. He stopped near the doorway, listening. He didn't move, afraid to interrupt. The waitress kept playing, unaware she had an audience, her eyes closed, lost in the music. That was the night something changed. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet world was about to open in ways she never imagined. The morning after the event, she woke up with a strange feeling in her chest, something between nervousness and quiet happiness. She wasn't sure if what happened last night had been a dream or not. The sound of the piano still echoed in her ears. The soft notes, the empty ballroom, the way her hands trembled as she played. It all felt unreal. She had gone home late, too tired to even change out of her uniform. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about that moment. For a few minutes, she hadn't been a waitress or a worker cleaning tables. She had been the person she once dreamed of becoming, a pianist. When she arrived at the restaurant that morning, she expected everything to be normal again. The smell of coffee, the sound of dishes, the same orders. But something felt different inside her. It was as if a small spark had been lit, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push it away. She moved through her day quietly, serving customers, smiling politely. Nobody knew that her thoughts were somewhere else. Every time she carried a tray, she imagined her fingers on piano keys. Every time she heard a bell ring, she thought of melodies. Later that afternoon, while she was restocking cups behind the counter, the restaurant manager called her name. "You worked the hotel event last night, right?" he asked. She nodded, a little nervous. "Yes, sir," he smiled slightly. "Someone from the hotel called this morning. They asked for your name." Her heart skipped a beat. "My name?" she repeated softly. "Yes." Said something about wanting to thank the staff for helping so late. Maybe they'll send over a note. She tried to act normal, but her mind was racing. What if it was the person who had seen her playing the piano? Did they say anything else? But she didn't ask. She just smiled and said, "That's nice of them." The rest of the day passed slowly. Every time the phone rang, her heart jumped a little. But there was no call for her. That night, she walked home under the cool glow of the streetlights, her hands deep in her pockets. Her breath came out in small clouds in the chilly air. She thought about how life could change in a second, or maybe not change at all. When she reached her small apartment, she sat at her piano again. The keys were slightly out of tune, but to her they still sounded like home. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play softly, just like she did the night before. Halfway through her song, she stopped suddenly. What if someone really had heard her? What if that moment meant something? She shook her head and smiled a little to herself. "You're dreaming again," she whispered. "Don't get carried away." Still, the hope stayed. A few days passed before anything unusual happened. The restaurant was quieter than usual that morning when a man in a suit walked in. He didn't look like a regular customer. He spoke to the manager for a while, and then both of them looked in her direction. She froze, her heart pounding. After a few minutes, the manager called her over. "Hey," he said. "This gentleman wants to talk to you." The man smiled politely. "Hello," he said. "I was one of the organizers at the hotel event last week. Were you part of the staff that night?" "Yes," she said quietly. He nodded. "I thought so. I came back into the ballroom after everyone left." "You were playing the piano." Her face went pale. She didn't know what to say. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I shouldn't have. I know I wasn't supposed to," but the man raised his hand kindly. No, don't apologize. You played beautifully. Honestly, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was moving." She blinked, unsure how to react. Nobody had ever said words like that to her in a long time. He continued, "We're hosting another event next month, and our regular pianist is out of town. I was wondering if you'd be interested in playing for one of the smaller sessions. Just a background performance, nothing formal." Her mouth went dry. "Me? Play at the hotel?" He nodded. "Yes, it wouldn't be much, but we could pay you for your time. I can give you the details if you'd like." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The restaurant noise faded into the background, the chatter, the clinking cups, all gone. It was just her and that single offer floating in the air. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd love to." The man smiled, handed her a business card, and left. Her manager just looked at her, half amused and half surprised. "Well," he said, "looks like our quiet waitress has some hidden talents." She felt her cheeks turn red. "I just got lucky," she said, tucking the card into her apron pocket. But inside, her heart was racing faster than ever. That night, she didn't even eat dinner. She sat at her piano, staring at the keys. She couldn't believe someone had noticed her playing, and more than that, they wanted her to play again. For real. But as excitement filled her, fear slowly crept in too. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made mistakes? It had been years since she performed for anyone. She wasn't even sure if her piano at home sounded the way it used to. She took a deep breath and started practicing. Night after night, after work, she played until her hands hurt. Sometimes she'd stop and rest her head against the piano, feeling tears sting her eyes. She wasn't crying out of sadness, and it was something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Her neighbor, the old lady next door, knocked one evening. "You've been playing more lately," she said with a gentle smile. "It sounds lovely." "Thank you," the waitress said shyly. "I'm practicing for something." "Good," the woman said. "You should. I don't know your story, but I can tell music lives in you. Don't hide it." Those words stayed with her for days. When the day of the hotel event finally came, she woke up before sunrise. Her stomach was full of butterflies. She ironed her simple black dress 3 times and made sure her hair looked neat. The hotel ballroom looked even more beautiful this time. Golden lights, flowers, and that same grand piano in the center of the room. She walked toward it slowly, her heart beating in her throat. One of the staff members greeted her kindly and showed her where to sit. She placed her sheet music carefully, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Her fingers already remembered every note. As guests started arriving, she tried to calm her nerves. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to impress anyone, just to play. When she touched the keys, everything else disappeared. The noise, the people, the fear, all of it melted away. The music took over, flowing from her hands like it had been waiting all this time to come alive. Some guests stopped talking to listen. Others smiled as they passed by. The sound filled the room softly, wrapping around every corner like a warm blanket. After her set, the organizer approached her again. "That was wonderful," he said. "Would you consider coming back for more events? You have a gift." She couldn't stop smiling. "I'd love to," she said. Over the next few weeks, she played at several more gatherings, small dinners, afternoon teas, quiet receptions. Each time her confidence grew, people started recognizing her. Some even asked her name, wanting to know who the pianist was. One evening, a woman approached her after a performance. She introduced herself as a local music teacher and asked, "Did you ever study professionally?" The waitress hesitated, then said, "I did once, but I had to stop." The teacher smiled softly. "Then you should start again. You have something special. Don't let it fade." That night she walked home under the stars, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving toward something instead of running away from it. She still worked at the restaurant during the day, but things had changed. Her co-workers teased her gently, calling her the pianist, and her manager sometimes played her performances on his phone, proud to show customers. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was happiness. It was hope. It was proof that life could surprise you when you least expected it. One evening, as she closed up the restaurant, she stood by the window watching the lights outside. She thought about how everything had started. One quiet night, one piano, one song. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe this is just the beginning." And in her heart, she believed it was. The next few months passed like a dream. She worked at the restaurant during the day and played piano at small hotel events on weekends. Life was still hard, but it felt different now. There was a sense of direction, a quiet happiness that followed her wherever she went. Every time she sat down at the piano, she felt alive again. Her co-workers noticed the change too. The quiet waitress who used to keep to herself now smiled more. She moved with lightness, and sometimes they could even hear her humming softly as she worked. The manager often teased her by saying, "Careful, soon you'll be too famous to serve coffee here." She would laugh shyly and say, "I'll never be famous. I just love playing." But deep inside, a small part of her wondered, what if? What if her music could really take her somewhere? What if she could finally live the dream she once thought was lost forever? Then one morning, something unexpected happened. The hotel manager called her and asked if she could perform at a large charity gala they were hosting that weekend. It was a big event, more important than any she had ever played before. The guests would include business owners, artists, and even a few well-known musicians. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I usually play at smaller gatherings." The manager's voice was warm and reassuring. "You've impressed everyone here. I think you're ready for something bigger." "You'll do fine," she agreed, though her hands trembled as she hung up the phone. She couldn't believe it. The charity gala. It was the same kind of event she had served at months ago, back when she was still just a waitress watching from the sidelines. Now she would be the one sitting at the grand piano. The next few days were a blur of preparation. She practiced for hours every night, polishing every note until it sounded perfect. She wanted to make sure that if people were listening, they'd feel something real. She didn't care about showing off. She just wanted them to hear her heart through the music. On the day of the event, she woke up early. Her nerves wouldn't let her sleep. She made herself tea, but her hands were shaking too much to drink it. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress and a small silver bracelet her mother had given her years ago. When she arrived at the hotel, She felt the familiar mix of excitement and fear. The ballroom was already being decorated with flowers and lights. The same staff she used to work alongside were now setting tables again, but this time she wasn't one of them. One of the servers recognized her and smiled warmly. "You're the pianist tonight?" he said, surprised. She nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, can you believe it?" He laughed softly. "You deserve it. I remember when you used to stare at that piano like it was calling your name." That made her laugh too, though her eyes glistened with emotion. He was right. That piano had always felt like something just out of reach. And now here it was, waiting for her. As the evening began, guests filled the room. The air buzzed with chatter and laughter. Waiters moved swiftly between tables and the lights shimmered across the walls. She sat quietly near the stage, waiting for her cue. The grand piano stood in the center, its polished surface reflecting the glow of the chandeliers. Her heart pounded as the event host took the stage and began welcoming everyone. She tried to calm herself by taking slow breaths, but her thoughts were spinning. What if she messed up? What if her hands froze? What if nobody liked her music? She closed her eyes and whispered a small prayer under her breath, asking for courage. Then she remembered her father's words from years ago. "When you play, don't think about the people. Just talk to the piano, and it will answer you." The host finally called her name, introducing her as a young local pianist whose passion had touched many hearts. The audience clapped politely as she walked up the steps. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. She sat down, placed her hands gently on the keys, and took one deep breath. The first note was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper. Then another followed, and another. Slowly the melody began to grow, filling the ballroom with warmth and emotion. People started to turn their heads. Conversations faded. Some leaned back in their chairs, listening. The sound was pure, full of feeling. Not something rehearsed or polished by fame, but something honest. She played a piece she had written herself, one she had composed during her hardest days. It was about hope, about holding on even when life felt heavy. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence she didn't know she had. The piano seemed alive beneath her hands, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. By the time she finished, the room was silent. For a moment she thought something was wrong, but then the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder until the entire hall was clapping. Some guests even stood up, their faces filled with emotion. She looked up, her eyes shining, overwhelmed by the sound of it all. She smiled, a small, humble smile, and bowed her head slightly before leaving the stage. Backstage, she took a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling again, but for a different reason. It wasn't fear anymore. It was joy. The hotel manager came running toward her with a huge smile. "You were incredible," he said. "You have no idea how many people just asked about you." She laughed nervously. "Really?" "Yes, you moved everyone. One of the guests even asked for your contact information. I think tonight changed everything for you." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It felt too good to be real. After the event ended, a few guests approached her personally to thank her for the performance. One woman, dressed elegantly, said, "Your music made me cry. I don't know why, but it reminded me of something I'd forgotten, something beautiful." Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." Later, when everyone had left and the ballroom was quiet again, she stayed behind to look at the piano one last time. She gently touched the keys, feeling grateful. The man who had first discovered her, the event organizer, walked up beside her. "You've come a long way," he said kindly. "Do you remember the first night I heard you play?" She nodded, smiling. "I was terrified," he chuckled. "Well, you turned that fear into something magical tonight. Keep going. Don't stop here." Those words stayed in her heart long after the night ended. When she got home, she didn't even take off her dress. She sat down at her old piano again, still glowing from the evening's memory. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play the same melody she had performed at the hotel. Softly, quietly for herself this time. Her neighbor, the old lady next door, knocked gently on the wall, as she always did when listening. The waitress smiled and played a little louder, letting the sound drift through the thin walls like a secret shared between friends. She knew life wouldn't suddenly become easy. She would still have to work, still face struggles, still pay rent and bills. But now she also had something stronger than all of that. Belief. Belief that maybe her story wasn't finished yet. The next morning, she walked into the restaurant as usual, tying her apron and greeting the team. Her manager waved a newspaper at her, grinning. "Look at this," he said. "You're in the news." She froze. "What?" He pointed at the page. There it was. A photo of her playing at the piano with a headline that read, "Waitress stuns guests with heartfelt piano performance." Her eyes widened. "Oh no," she whispered, half embarrassed and half amazed. Customers who came in that morning smiled and congratulated her. Some even asked if she would still be working there now that she was famous. She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not famous. I'm just me." But deep down she knew her life was beginning to shift in ways she couldn't yet see. That one night, that one performance, had opened a door she never knew existed. She spent her breaks at work scribbling down melodies on napkins, ideas that came to her suddenly, tunes about new beginnings, about courage, about hope. Every time she sat at her piano, she thought of that ballroom, the faces, the applause, the feeling of finally being seen. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew this: she would never stop playing again. Because sometimes all it takes is one small chance and one brave moment to remind you who you truly are. And that night she had found herself again. The days after the charity event felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Everything around her looked the same. The restaurant, the street, her small apartment. Yet something deep inside her had changed. The fear she once carried in her heart had softened. It had turned into quiet confidence. Everywhere she went, people seemed to look at her differently. Some of the regular customers at the restaurant recognized her from the newspaper article. They would smile kindly or ask her if she was the piano girl from the hotel. Each time she'd blush a little and say, "Yes, that was me." Her co-workers teased her gently. "Careful," one of them joked. "Soon we'll need to get your autograph before you become too important for us." She laughed, shaking her head. "Trust me, I'm not important. I'm just lucky," but she knew it wasn't luck. It was years of quiet practice, late nights, and holding on to something that almost slipped away. She continued working at the restaurant, but the hotel also began calling her more often. Her schedule became busier, yet she didn't mind. Playing the piano didn't feel like work to her. It felt like breathing. Every time she sat at the keys, she felt at peace. Then one afternoon, while she was finishing a small performance at the hotel, something unexpected happened. A man approached her as she packed her things. He was older, with kind eyes and a calm voice. "That was a beautiful performance," he said. "You have real emotion in your playing." "Thank you," she said softly, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "I used to work in the music industry," he continued. "I've heard hundreds of pianists, but very few play the way you do. You don't just play notes, you tell a story." She didn't quite know how to respond. Compliments like that always made her shy. "That means a lot," she finally said. "I've always loved music, but I never thought I'd get to play again like this." He smiled. "If you're open to it, I'd like to introduce you to a few people. There's a small recording studio nearby. They often feature local talent. You could share your compositions, maybe even record one of your own pieces." Her heart jumped. "Record me?" "Yes," he said kindly. "You have something people should hear." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd love that." Over the next few weeks, they stayed in touch. He wasn't promising fame or money. He just wanted to help her find a place to grow. Together, they visited a small recording studio tucked in an old building downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming. The owner was a quiet woman who loved discovering new artists. When the pianist sat down at the piano and began to play, the entire room went still. The music was soft at first, like a whisper, then slowly grew stronger, filled with both sadness and hope. When she finished, the studio owner had tears in her eyes. "You've been through something," she said softly. "I can feel it in every note," the pianist nodded. "Music has been the only thing that never left me," she said. They recorded a few of her songs over the next few sessions. She was nervous at first, but soon forgot about the microphones and cables. When she played, it was just her and the piano, the same way it had always been. After the recordings were done, the studio shared a short clip online. They posted it with a simple caption. "Sometimes the most beautiful stories come from the quietest people. No one expected what happened next." Within days, the video began spreading. People shared it on social media, commenting things like, Her music feels like peace, and you can feel her heart in every note. Some even said her music helped them through hard days. One night, while sitting at her small kitchen table, she opened her phone and saw the video had reached over 1 million views. Her hands covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, and now, strangers from all over the world were listening to her. Her phone began to fill with messages, people asking where they could hear more, or thanking her for touching their hearts. She couldn't believe it. The quiet girl who once wiped tables and dreamed in secret was now inspiring others. Despite all the attention, she stayed humble. She still worked at the restaurant, though her shifts were fewer now. She loved her coworkers and didn't want to forget where she came from. She'd often bring her small keyboard to the back room during breaks and practice quietly. Sometimes the cooks would stop what they were doing just to listen. "You know," one of them said one night, "it's crazy how your music makes everything feel lighter. Even the dishes don't seem so bad when you're playing." She smiled. "That's the best compliment I could get." Not long after, she received an invitation from the hotel. They wanted her to perform again, but this time as the main act for another charity event. They told her it would be bigger than the last one. Famous guests, news coverage, and possibly even a few record label representatives. When she read the message, her hands trembled. It was everything she had once dreamed of, and it terrified her. The night before the event, she barely slept. She sat at her piano, running her fingers over the keys, whispering softly to herself. "You can do this. Just play from your heart. That's all you've ever needed." When the big night arrived, the ballroom glowed under golden lights. The air buzzed with excitement. She stood backstage, peeking through the curtain. The crowd was larger than anything she had ever seen before. Her chest tightened, but then she spotted something familiar. The same old grand piano in the center of the stage. It looked just like the night she first played when no one was watching. She took a deep breath and walked toward it. As she sat down, the lights dimmed. The chatter faded. A spotlight fell on her. She looked out at the sea of faces and felt a wave of emotion rise inside her. Fear, yes, but also gratitude. Every struggle, every long night, every tear had brought her here. Then she began to play. The first few notes were delicate, trembling slightly. But then something shifted. Her nerves disappeared, replaced by warmth. The music poured out of her like water, smooth and full of life. The piece she played was her own, a song she had written years ago during her hardest times. It spoke of loss, but also of finding strength again. It carried the sound of late nights, quiet dreams, and the echo of hope that never dies. The audience sat completely still. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others whispered softly to each other, amazed by how much emotion one person could express without saying a single word. As the final note faded, there was a long, breathtaking silence. Then suddenly applause filled the room. Loud, heartfelt, unstoppable applause. People stood up cheering. Some even had tears in their eyes. She looked out at the crowd, her own eyes shining. Her hands were shaking, but she couldn't stop smiling. She stood, bowed her head slightly, and whispered a quiet thank you before stepping away from the piano. Backstage, she was greeted with hugs, congratulations, and words she never thought she'd hear. "You were amazing." That was unforgettable. "You belong on stage," the hotel manager, beaming with pride, said. "I told you this was just the beginning." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I can't believe this is real." That night, when she returned home, she sat at her old piano again, the same one with chipped keys and faded wood. She ran her fingers along it gently, remembering where it all began. She thought about the girl she used to be, tired, uncertain, holding on to a dream no one else believed in. And she smiled, realizing that dream had quietly been waiting for her all along. Outside her window, the city lights flickered like tiny stars. She pressed a single key, listening to its soft echo fill the room. Then she began to play again, not for fame, not for applause, but for herself. Because deep down, she knew this truth. The real magic wasn't that people finally heard her. It was that she had finally found the courage to let them. And from that moment on, she promised herself she would never hide her music again. The next few weeks after her big performance felt like a beautiful blur. Everywhere she went, people wanted to talk to her about that night. The hotel staff would still mention how the audience stood to clap for her. Some said it was the most emotional performance they had ever seen. At first, she didn't really know how to take all the attention. She had spent years blending into the background, working quietly, serving others, and now suddenly people were saying her name with admiration. It felt strange, almost unreal. She went back to her small apartment the night after the concert, still wearing her stage dress, and sat at her old piano. She placed her fingers on the keys and smiled softly. "We did it," she whispered. "You and me." She looked around. Her little room, the peeling paint, the old curtains, the faint hum of traffic outside. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. It was where her music had been born. The next morning, when she opened her phone, she was stunned. Her video from the concert had gone viral. Someone in the audience had recorded her performance and uploaded it with the caption, "The waitress who played her heart out." It already had hundreds of thousands of views, and the numbers kept climbing. People from all over the world were commenting, leaving messages like, "This touched my soul," and "I cried listening to her." She scrolled through them, feeling both overwhelmed and deeply grateful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. People weren't just seeing her, they were feeling her. A few days later, the hotel called her again. This time not for another performance, but for interviews. Reporters wanted to know her story. They wanted to understand how a quiet waitress had suddenly captured everyone's hearts. She was nervous. She didn't know what to say or how to act on camera. She wasn't used to attention. But she reminded herself, these people weren't asking for a performance. They just wanted the truth. So when the interviews began, she spoke simply. She told them about her childhood, about how her father used to whistle while fixing things around the house, and how she would tap her fingers to the rhythm. She talked about her old piano teacher who once said, "Music is just a feeling you share with the world." She talked about how she lost everything for a while, her studies, her confidence, and how working at the restaurant taught her patience and strength. Every time she spoke, her honesty made people love her even more. Soon, magazines began to write about her, not as a celebrity but as an inspiration. One article called her the waitress who reminded us that dreams don't expire, the man who had helped her find the recording studio, the one who first believed in her talent, called one afternoon with exciting news. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "A local music company wants to meet you. They've seen your video. They think you have something special." Her heart raced. She couldn't believe it. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Very," he replied. "They want to talk about helping you record your first full album." An album. The word sounded unreal to her. She had never imagined it. She had played her songs for herself, for the quiet, for peace. But now people actually wanted to hear them. When she went to the meeting, she was trembling. The studio was modern, filled with instruments and microphones, nothing like the small one she'd first recorded in. The producers were kind, not the cold business type she had feared. They listened carefully as she played one of her songs on the piano. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before one of them said softly, "That's real. That's the kind of music the world needs." They offered to help her produce a collection of songs, her own compositions. They said they didn't want to change her or make her sound commercial. They just wanted her to stay genuine. That meant everything to her. The following months were full of new experiences. She spent hours in the recording booth wearing big headphones, surrounded by sound engineers adjusting levels and nodding as she played. At first she felt nervous being watched, but soon she learned to close her eyes and forget they were there. She let her fingers tell the stories she couldn't put into words. The songs came from her life. The quiet nights, the struggles, the hope that refused to fade. One song was about her father, another about the restaurant that had become her second home. She wrote one about her fear of failure, and another about rediscovering herself. Every time she finished a piece, she'd listen to the playback and smile quietly. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. As she worked on her music, people continued to reach out online. A young girl wrote to her saying, "I stopped playing piano after my parents told me it was useless. But after watching you, I started again." Another message said, Your music helped me get through a dark time." Reading those words made her realize something powerful. She wasn't just living her dream anymore. She was helping others find theirs too. Her album release was simple, not some big flashy event. They uploaded it online with the title, "From the Quiet." It was her way of saying that even the quietest voices can still be heard. The day it came out, she didn't expect much, but within hours the songs began spreading again. They were shared on playlists, in short videos, even used in background music for documentaries. One song, "Still Here," became especially popular. It was the same melody she had played that first night at the hotel, the song that had changed everything. One evening, as she sat at home reading through the comments under her album, she suddenly got a phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she said. "Hi," said the voice on the other end. "I don't know if you remember me, but I was at that first charity gala, the one where you filled in for the missing pianist." She smiled softly. "Of course, that night changed my life." "Well," the voice continued, "we're organizing another event next month, but this time, we'd like you to be the guest performer, not as a waitress, but as our honored musician." She felt her heart swell. For a moment she couldn't speak. "I'd be honored," she finally said. The next few weeks passed in excitement and preparation. She picked out her songs, practiced every day, and reminded herself how far she had come. When the night of the event arrived, she wore a simple white dress, the same one she had worn before, just cleaned and pressed. It wasn't about fashion. It was about coming full circle. As she stepped onto the stage, she looked out at the audience, rows of people dressed in elegance, the same golden lights glowing softly above them. She could see familiar faces, the hotel manager, some of her old restaurant co-workers, and the man who had believed in her from the start. She smiled, took her seat at the piano, and took a deep breath. The room fell silent. Then she began to play. This time she didn't feel nervous. There was no fear, no trembling, only peace. Every note carried her story, not of struggle, but of triumph. She played like she was speaking to her past self, the girl who once doubted she'd ever be enough. When she finished, the applause came like a wave. People stood again, just like before, but now she could see the joy in their faces, not surprise. They weren't just clapping for her talent, they were clapping for her journey. After the performance, several guests came to speak with her. Among them was a music producer from another city who offered to feature her in a televised concert. But what touched her most wasn't the offers or the fame. It was when one of the servers, a young woman carrying a tray, quietly whispered, "You're the reason I still believe in my dreams." That sentence stayed with her long after the event was over. Later that night, when she returned home, she placed her hands on the piano once again. The same instrument that had seen her through everything. Her fears, her hopes, her miracles. She took a deep breath and started playing softly, her fingers dancing lightly across the keys. The melody filled the room, warm and gentle, like a quiet promise to herself. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need awards or fame. She just needed to keep playing, because through music she had found herself again. And somewhere deep down she knew this was only the beginning of a much greater story. Months passed and life slowly began to change in ways she had never imagined. Every morning she still woke up early and made her coffee the same way, still kept her little apartment neat and quiet. But there was a new light in her days now. The world had started to recognize her, not just as the girl who once worked in a restaurant, but as someone whose music could touch hearts. Her album was doing well, far better than she ever hoped. People from different countries sent her letters, drawings, and messages about how her songs made them feel seen. One person wrote that they listened to her music every night to help them sleep. Another said her melodies helped them believe that good things could still happen after loss. Reading those words always made her eyes fill with tears. It wasn't fame that moved her. It was connection. She had once thought music was her escape, but now she understood it was her bridge to others. She still visited the restaurant sometimes just to say hello. The place where her journey began held a special place in her heart. Her co-workers treated her like family. They would tease her, saying, "Don't forget us when you win a music award." And she would laugh, replying, "You'll always be part of my story." One evening, she sat by her piano, softly playing the same old tune that had changed everything. The chipped keys felt familiar beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes and let the sound fill the room. The melody still carried the same warmth, the same hope. It reminded her of where she came from, a reminder to never lose her grounding. A few weeks later, she received an invitation that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a national television channel. They were hosting a special charity concert featuring inspiring musicians. They wanted her to perform as the closing act. She read the message over and over again, hardly believing it. It wasn't just any show. This was a stage that would be watched by millions of people across the country. The thought made her nervous, but also excited. She had faced so many fears already. This one, she knew, was just another step forward. As the event approached, she practiced every day. Her apartment echoed with soft music from morning to night. Sometimes, when she got tired, she would stop, stretch her fingers, and smile. "You've come a long way," she whispered to herself. When the big day finally arrived, she woke up early and watched the sunrise from her window. The sky was glowing softly, and the city below was waking up slowly. She took it as a sign, a new beginning, a gentle reminder that light always comes after darkness. The concert was held in a grand theater filled with lights and cameras. The moment she stepped inside, her heart started to race. The backstage area was buzzing with excitement. Other artists tuned their instruments, checked microphones, and rehearsed quietly. Everyone seemed calm, but she could feel her own nerves rising. A young stage assistant walked up to her and smiled. "You're going to be amazing," they said softly. "Everyone's talking about how much they're looking forward to your performance." She smiled shyly and nodded. "Thank you. I just hope they can feel the music." When her turn came, the lights dimmed and the stage went quiet. The host announced her name and the audience applauded warmly. She walked to the center of the stage, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The grand piano stood waiting under a single soft light. She sat down slowly, taking a deep breath. For a second, she closed her eyes. Then she remembered the little restaurant, the sound of dishes, the smell of coffee, and the first time she had dared to play in front of others. That memory gave her strength. She began to play. The first few notes were soft and gentle, almost like a whisper. But soon the sound grew deeper, filled with emotion. Every key she touched told a story, of struggle, of fear, of hope, of quiet victories. The audience listened in complete silence. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Her piece that night was a new one, written especially for this concert. It was called "Light Found Me." It spoke of her journey, of finding beauty even when life felt dark, of realizing that sometimes it's not you chasing the light, but the light waiting for you to notice it. As she played, memories passed through her mind like flickering scenes. Her father smiling at her when she was a child, the small room where she used to practice in secret, the faces of her co-workers cheering her on, and that first night when no one believed she could play. By the time she reached the final note, her eyes were filled with tears. The sound faded softly into the air, then silence. For a heartbeat, the entire theater was still. And then, the applause began. Slow at first, then growing louder and louder until it filled every corner of the room. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some were crying. She stood, bowed slightly and whispered, "Thank you," though her voice was barely heard over the applause. Her heart felt full. She didn't need trophies or fame. That moment, the connection between her and those people, was enough. After the performance, several journalists and producers came to meet her. They congratulated her and offered her new opportunities. But in the middle of all the praise, one woman approached her quietly. She looked to be in her late 40s with kind eyes. "I just wanted to tell you," the woman said softly. "My daughter used to play piano, but she stopped after losing confidence. Tonight, she watched you on TV, and she turned to me and said, 'Mom, I want to start again.' Thank you for giving her that." Tears filled the pianist's eyes. She held the woman's hands and said, "That means more to me than anything else." That night, when she returned home, she was exhausted but filled with peace. She placed her bag on the floor, sat at her piano, and let her fingers rest on the keys. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. She smiled. "We did it again," she whispered to her piano. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of messages. People from all over the country had watched the performance. They shared clips, tagged her name, and wrote things like, "Her music feels like home," and "I didn't just hear her play, I felt it." A few weeks later, the concert organizers contacted her again. They told her they were planning another event, and this time, a tour to different cities, and they wanted her to be part of it. It was overwhelming, but she said yes. The following months became a beautiful blur of travel, music, and meeting people who had been touched by her songs. Each city brought new faces and stories: a little girl who gifted her a handmade bracelet, a young man who said he started learning piano because of her, and an elderly couple who thanked her for bringing back memories of their youth. With every performance, she felt more connected, not just to the audience but to life itself. One evening near the end of her tour, she performed in her hometown. It was the same city where she had once been a waitress, serving tables, unnoticed by most. When she stepped onto that stage, she saw familiar faces in the crowd: her old manager, her co-workers, even a few regular customers. They all smiled proudly. Some waved. Before playing, she took the microphone and said softly, "This is where everything began for me. Back then I didn't believe I could reach this far. I just knew that I loved music, and sometimes that's all you need. One small love, one small hope. If anyone out there is holding on to a dream quietly, please don't let it go. Your moment will come, even if it takes time." Then she played, not just a song, but a thank you. The crowd stood, clapping through tears. And in that moment, she felt something complete inside her, as if life had come full circle. When the concert ended and the lights dimmed, she stayed alone on the stage for a few minutes. She touched the piano gently, smiling through tears. She had once been just a quiet girl behind a counter, and now she was a voice that reached hearts. But more than success, she had found peace. Peace in knowing she stayed true to herself. Peace in realizing that dreams never really disappear. They wait, quietly, until we're ready to bring them back to life. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." And in that simple moment, surrounded by silence, warmth, and the memory of every note she had ever played, she knew this wasn't the end. It was just another beginning.